On a cold Saturday evening at the end of January, Britain was doing what it always did at the weekend. Fires were lit in front rooms, children were already asleep upstairs, and the wireless murmured softly in the corner, filling houses with the calm, familiar voices of the BBC. Along the East Coast, there was nothing to suggest that history was about to break in through the door. It felt like just another winter night, quiet, ordinary, almost comforting. But far out in the North Sea, beyond the horizon, something enormous was building, unseen and unheard by the people whose lives it would soon destroy. Number 1. When Britain went to bed. In 1953, Britain still lived by routines. Saturday night meant early beds for children, warm tea before sleep, and the gentle crackle of coal fires downstairs. Families were tired, still rebuilding their lives after the war, still used to hardship, but settled into a sense of fragile normality. Along the East Coast, towns like Canvey Island, Jaywick, Hunstanton, and Felixstowe sat quietly behind their sea walls, trusting them as they always had. These defenses had been there for decades, scarred by war, patched and repaired when money allowed, but rarely questioned. They had held before, so people assumed they would hold again. There was no sense of urgency, no panic, no reason to stay awake. Television was rare, and radio broadcasts ended early in the evening. Once the lights went out, the country went quiet. By midnight, thousands of people were asleep, completely unaware that the sea was already moving toward them. Number 2. The storm that built itself. The warning signs existed, but they were scattered, technical, and easily missed. The Meteorological Office had noted a deep, low-pressure system developing over the North Sea, combined with powerful northerly winds and unusually high spring tides. On paper, it looked dangerous. In reality, few people understood what that combination truly meant. As the storm moved south, hurricane-force winds began pushing water ahead of them, piling it higher and higher like a slow-moving wall. The shape of the North Sea worked against Britain, narrowing as it moved south and forcing the water upward, compressing it, lifting it far above normal levels. In some places, the sea rose more than 18 feet higher than expected. This was not a wave that crashed and retreated. It was a surge, relentless and unstoppable, driven by wind, gravity, and geography. And it was moving faster than anyone on land could run. Number 3. Warnings that never arrived. In modern Britain, warnings arrive instantly, flashing on screens, buzzing in pockets, interrupting programs. In 1953, none of that existed. Telephones were limited, many radio stations had already gone off air for the night, and power lines were among the first things destroyed by the storm itself. Police officers tried to alert residents where they could, knocking on doors, shouting through the wind, sounding sirens that many people never heard. In some towns, the sirens were raised too late. In others, there were no sirens at all. Most families went to bed believing they would wake up to another cold morning, unaware that water was already pushing against the walls meant to protect them. Number 4. When the sea arrived. Just after midnight, the surge reached the East Coast. Sea walls that had stood for generations simply vanished beneath the force of the water. Over 1,200 breaches opened along the coastline, each one allowing freezing seawater to pour inland at terrifying speed. In places like Hunstanton and Mablethorpe, waves surged streets inland, lifting cars, smashing doors from their hinges, and filling homes in minutes. People woke to the sound of roaring water, confused and disoriented, stepping from their beds straight into freezing darkness. By the time many reached their staircases, the water was already chest high. Some never made it that far. Number 5. Canvey Island. Canvey Island suffered more than almost anywhere else. Low-lying and densely populated, it was home to around 11,000 people, many living in prefabricated houses built after the war as a temporary solution to Britain's housing crisis. Temporary, yet still standing 8 years later. When the seawall breached just after midnight, water swept across the island faster than anyone could react. Entire streets disappeared beneath 6 feet of icy seawater within minutes. Prefabs lifted off their foundations, floated briefly, then collapsed entirely. Children drowned in their beds. Elderly couples were trapped upstairs, watching the water rise with nowhere left to go. 58 people died on Canvey Island alone, their lives extinguished before dawn. Number 6. Jaywick and the coastline of loss. Further south, Jaywick faced a similar fate. This small seaside village, built largely from wooden chalets converted into permanent homes, stood directly in the sea's path. When the surge broke through, water flooded both from the front and from the marshes behind, trapping residents between 2 advancing walls. 37 people died there, representing 5% of the entire village. Whole families were wiped out. Some bodies were never recovered, washed back out to sea and lost forever. In Felixstowe, 41 people died when wooden prefabs flooded in the early hours. In Harwich, cellar flats filled instantly, trapping residents with no escape. Along the coast, the same horror repeated itself again and again. Number 7. Individual lives. Permanent silence. Statistics can never fully capture what happened that night. What remains are the stories. Elsie Lofts was in the cellar of the Anchor Hotel in Harwich with her husband when they heard a roar like nothing they had ever known. The outer door exploded inward, and a torrent of water slammed into them with the force of a train. Elsie found herself lifted to the top of the stairs without touching a single step. Behind her, the door slammed shut. Her husband was trapped below. She screamed his name into the darkness as the water rose, knowing she would never see him again. Peggy Morgan from Canvey Island lost her husband, her mother-in-law, and her 5-year-old son in a single night. She survived by clinging to furniture as the water tore her home apart around her. Years later, she spoke calmly of that night, her voice steady, her grief undiminished. Number 8. Heroes in the dark. Yet amid the terror, ordinary people became extraordinary. Police officers waded chest-deep through freezing water, carrying children and the elderly to safety. Firefighters launched boats down flooded streets, smashing through windows to reach trapped families. On Canvey Island, a local fireman ignored direct orders and sounded the old air raid siren, waking hundreds who might otherwise have drowned in their sleep. Neighbours formed human chains, passing children hand to hand through icy water toward higher ground. In Lincolnshire, 2 police officers, Charles Lewis and Leonard Dunsford, worked through the night rescuing survivors. Lewis jumped from an upper window to save an elderly couple being swept away, then continued searching for hours until he found a working telephone to call for help. Both men were later awarded the George Medal for their bravery. Number 9. Dawn over a broken coast. When daylight finally came, the scale of the disaster became impossible to ignore. Entire towns lay underwater, bodies floated in streets. Thousands of people stood in soaked clothing, clutching whatever they had managed to save, watching their lives drift away in the cold. Canvey Island looked like a lake, with only rooftops visible above the surface. Jaywick had effectively vanished. Across the coast, families searched desperately for loved ones, hoping for miracles that often never came. Number 10. The cost beyond death. The final toll was staggering. In England, over 300 people were confirmed dead, with many more injured or missing. Across the North Sea in the Netherlands, where the same storm struck even harder, over 1,800 people lost their lives. At sea, another 230 sailors drowned as vessels were torn apart by the storm. Beyond the human loss, over 24,000 homes were destroyed or severely damaged. 160,000 acres of farmland were flooded with salt water, rendered unusable for years. Livestock drowned by the thousands. Roads, railways, and power stations were knocked out, paralyzing entire regions. In 1953 money, the damage was estimated at £50 million. In today's terms, well over £1 billion. Number 11. Why Britain wasn't ready. Hard questions followed. Why were people not warned? Why did the seawalls fail so completely? Why were so many families living in such vulnerable housing so close to the coast? The answers were uncomfortable. Post-war Britain was poor, exhausted, and still rebuilding. Prefabs were meant to be temporary, but housing shortages turned them into permanent homes. Sea defenses damaged during the war had never been fully repaired. A proper flood warning system simply did not exist. The country had survived bombing and rationing, but it was unprepared for the quiet power of the sea. Number 12. Lessons written in water. Britain learned from the disaster, though the lessons came at an unbearable cost. The Meteorological Office was given responsibility for flood forecasting and warnings. Seawalls were raised and strengthened. New housing regulations banned building in the most vulnerable areas. Most significantly, plans were drawn up for the Thames Barrier, a massive engineering project designed to protect London from future storm surges. It would take nearly 30 years to complete, finally opening in 1982, but it stands today because of what happened in 1953. Across the North Sea, the Netherlands launched the Delta Works, one of the most ambitious flood defense systems ever built. Both countries shared the same vow: never again. 70 years on, the night the sea took Britain still lingers in memory. Those who lived through it remember the sound of water smashing through doors, the freezing darkness, and the silence that followed. In 2013, another storm surge struck the East Coast, almost exactly 60 years later. This time, the barriers held. Not a single life was lost. The lessons learned in 1953, paid for in lives, had worked. If someone in your family remembers that night, or if these stories sound familiar, share them below. All we can do now is remember those who were taken, and make sure it never happens again.